Hey everybody, this is Cody, and right now we're going to learn some Tinkercad. So you might be interested in learning 3D printing and learning how to create 3D objects for 3D printing, but you're not really sure where to start. There are several different softwares that you can use to create objects for printing, or you can, if you have the internet and a WebGL enabled browser such as Chrome or Safari, you can just do it online for free through Tinkercad.com. So I think it's really easy to learn, and it's super easy to use. If you go to the website and look up to the top, you'll see a link that says Learn. And if you click that link and go through some of the 6 basic tutorials, you'll be able to pretty much create just about anything you need to. But if you don't want to go through all the effort of going through the 6 tutorials, you can just watch this video and have a pretty decent idea on how to use Tinkercad. So we're just going to go ahead and create something really simple like this key ring. And to do that, I'm just going to create a new project, and this is the workspace. This is what it looks like when you first pull it up. Alright, so looking at this workspace, you can see that there's quite a lot of things going on. If we start here at the top left, you can see something pretty much unpronounceable. They just generate random words for the titles. Below that, you can see there's a home with 4 different buttons. These are how you can move around the viewport. I never use that. I just use the mouse. This is zoom in, zoom out. Again, I use the mouse. So on the top right, you can see undo, redo, adjust, group, ungroup. We'll get into all this in a little bit, but I just want you to see where it all is. And then to the right are all the primary objects. So I'm going to go ahead and create a primary object by clicking on one and just dragging it down into the workspace. Alright, so looking at this object, you can see there's a few things going on. You can see white dots in the corners, and you can see some rotation markers, and you can see a black arrow. So if you grab the white dot, you can scale it up or down, and you can see these numbers on the length and the height are changing, telling me how tall, how long, how wide the object is. So if I want to deselect, I can just click out into the workspace, and if I want to select, I can just click back onto the object, and you can see it has a blue outline around the object to let me know that I have it selected. Alright, if you'd like to rotate, you can always just grab either one of these rotation markers, and if I rotate around, it'll tell me what degree it is, which is pretty handy. I'm just going to leave it at 0. And this rotates in the y-axis, and again, it'll tell me how far to go. Alright, so let's learn some quick ways to move around the object. So if I click off, I can click back on. That's left mouse click. If I scroll the scroll wheel, if you have a 3-button mouse, you can zoom in. Scroll out. Alright, great. If you press down on the scroll wheel, you can pan around the object. Alright, so scroll in, scroll out, pan around, and then last, right-clicking will let you orbit around the object. Alright, so I don't use this top left corner at all, I just use the mouse, it's much easier. When you have an object selected, you can hit F and it will focus onto the object. So if I had several different objects, I could select one, press F, focus on it, navigate around, select another, press F, and very quickly rotate between different objects. Alright, so let's learn how to manipulate the object that we have. So we've seen that we can scale the object up and down. If you hold Shift, it will constrain the sizes. As you can see, if I pull it long ways, it'll get really long or really tall. But if I hold Shift, it'll constrain the proportion of the object so that it just gets larger in all 3 directions. So that's pretty valuable. Alright, so if you grab any of the corners, you can scale it up or down. If you grab the top white square, it will adjust the height. Okay? It's different than selecting the top black arrow, which actually physically moves it up and down in space. Alright, that's an important difference between scaling it up and down and moving it up and down in space. Okay? So that's the basics of moving it around. Again, as you can see, there are lots of different primary objects that you can select. I can throw out several different objects here into the work plane. And you can see they're all different colors. Alright, so if you want to print, you're actually going to need all these different shapes to be the same object. You can do this by doing what's called grouping. And this, I think, is the real strength of Tinkercad. It's much more difficult to do this in some of the other more expensive softwares. So to do this, you're going to select two different objects. And you can do this by selecting and dragging different objects. Or you can select an object, hold Shift, and then select another object. Alright, so up here to the top right, you can see in the inspector that you have the choice to group the objects. So I'm going to go ahead and group them now, and it's going to turn them into one single solid watertight object. Alright, so that's pretty neat. Alright, so there's another option here. If you see it says color, or you can see it says whole. So I'm going to group these objects, but instead I'm going to click the button that says whole. So I have this green roof selected, and I'm going to turn it into a whole, and you can see that it's turned translucent. And I'm going to scale it to the exact size, length, and width of the box. And I'm going to group these two objects. I'm going to group the hold roof and the other solid red brick. And just group them. And what that's going to do is wherever there's overlap of the whole and the regular object, it's going to carve out of the regular object. It takes a little while to load, but once it's ready, it'll just carve directly where there's any overlay with an hold object and the regular object. Alright, there we go. So as you can see, it's carved out from the regular object the hold triangular roof shape. Alright, that's pretty neat. And again, I could turn this into a hole or turn it off from a hole by selecting color and then scrolling over everything and grouping them together. Alright, so I'm going to delete that, and let's go ahead and make something really simple like a keychain. Okay, so I'm going to drop a square out, and I'm going to drag the bottom right corner to a long rectangular shape, and then I'm going to scroll it down to maybe 2 millimeters. Alright, so we have a long rectangle. Okay, so now I'm going to group a cylinder onto the rectangular shape, and I'm just going to grab the object and move it around so that they line up. And to do this, you can use the grid to make sure that these lines are perfectly level. Alright, great. And I'm going to select this object and drop it down to 2 millimeters. Alright, so now we know it's perfect. And before I group these, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this yellow sphere and hold Shift to scale it down. And I'm going to move it, oops, get that back. I'm going to move this into the very center, or close enough to the center that I can find it. And I'm going to scale it up, and I'm going to turn it into a hole. Oh, it disappeared. Alright, so I'm going to scale it down. And if you hold Shift and Option, it will scale from the very center. That's pretty interesting. It works just like in Maya. Alright, and if you hold Shift when you're moving an object, it will move along the same plane. I can't take it away from that plane. If I don't hold Shift, then I could move that object anywhere. But if I hold Shift, I can only move it in X or Y. So I'm going to move it right down to the very center. It's not quite the center. It's kind of hard to tell. And I'm going to scale it up a little bit. Again, holding Shift, Option from the corner. Alright, that looks pretty close. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and now group all these objects together, and what that will do is group the red rectangle with the orange cylinder, and it will take a hole out of the yellow cylinder. Alright, so there's the base of our keychain. So I'm going to go ahead and make this a little bit longer, and as you can see it will elongate the hole, and if I made it shorter it would make it into a different oblong oval. Alright, cool. So let's do some kind of border. I think maybe you could put out round roofs on top like they do in the Tinkercad tutorial. But let's do something different. Let's do maybe a roof. And again, I'm going to hold Shift to constrain the proportions. And I'm going to hit F to zoom in. And I'm going to hit the black arrow to move it up in Y space. Okay. And then I'm going to move it all the way back. Alright, that looks pretty cool. And now I'm going to hit Command D or Control D on Windows to duplicate the object. It glowed yellow for a second to let me know that. Alright, and if I move it and continuously press Command D, it will apply the same transformation of the last copy. So I've moved it, and I'm just going down the line. One more. Okay, I got it. Alright, so here's another thing to save time. I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to deselect that by holding Shift, and I'm going to group them together. Alright, and I'm going to duplicate that object and just move it over. Alright, looks like I went a little off. Alright, that's pretty cool. So you can see that there are two very different colors. It's only going to print in one color, so again we're going to have to combine all these objects into one group. But before I do that, I'm going to just expand the red keychain base just a little farther out so that it's down to the edge. Alright, so now I'm going to go ahead and group all the different objects together. And if I accidentally grouped those together and I needed to make this longer, I can always select it and ungroup later and then change something that's necessary. Okay, pretty neat. Let's see, now I guess I'll go ahead and add some new primary shapes. This time I'm going to go into the letters. If you just scroll down, you can see that there's all different kinds of letters, there's different numbers, symbols, and so I'm just going to go ahead and drop in some letters here. So there goes a Y, and I can scale it down. Okay, and I'm going to grab an O. And you can see that the letters aren't exactly lining up perfectly. Okay, so if you really want to line them up, you can do it one of several ways. You can look here at the bounding box, and you can select the letter's bounding boxes by selecting the letter and see if that lines up. And you can see it a little bit better if this is out of the way. So if I select this, I can see that the bounding box, it's actually like halfway through that. So I'm going to go ahead and bring it down, or bring it up so that it's directly on one of the lines. And you can see that this line lines up on the graph just like this one. Okay? And so I'm just going to drop in a bunch of letters here. And they are naturally all the same height and width, and not the length though. So that's all on this graph line. Alright, and I'm going to bring it back down. If you select it and hover over, you can see that it's 3 millimeters. And I'm going to bring this one down to 3, and this one down to 3. Alright, and let's group them together. Yo! Alright. And move it onto the keychain. Alright. And if you want, you can write your entire name. I'm just going to write Yo, and I'm going to delete the rest of the keychain by bringing in a box hole and making it bigger than what I have. Alright, that looks pretty cool. And then I'm just going to group all these objects together. And there we go. We have our finished keychain. Yo! If you forget your keys, you can always see them because they're going to be bright red and they're going to remind you, yo. Alright, so that's as simple as it is to build something in Tinkercad. When you're ready to download the object for printing, you just go up here to the top left where it says Design, and you can save it, duplicate it. But for printing, let's go ahead and download for 3D printing. And I'm going to download it as an STL, which is one of the most standard ways to save 3D objects for printing. And just click that first button. And it'll go ahead and download, and we're ready for the next step. Okay, once you've saved your 123D Catch or Tinkercad file, it's time to turn that STL file into something that the cube can print with. So this is the Cubify software. You can see the icon right here. This is what it looks like in the applications. And we're going to be working from left to right. It's pretty simple, it's pretty self-explanatory. But I'm going to go into a little bit more detail of each of these options. So first, let's go ahead and import our STL model. So if I click the little yellow robot, it's usually in downloads if you've downloaded it. So I'm going to go down, and you can see that they're a little bit yellow here, these STL files. And mine had a weird name. I think this is it. Okay, so I'm going to open it. And the first question is that it asks is it in inches? So by default, the Tinkercad files are in millimeters. So you want to hit no if you made the object in Tinkercad. Alright, so there it is. So let's give you a quick run through of how to move in the screen. If you left click, you can orbit around. If you middle scroll, you can zoom in and out. And if you right click, you can pan. And you're going to see these same commands over and over in all the different softwares. Okay, so there's my object. The first thing you want to do is go from import down to heal, and it's going to close any of the polygons, and it's going to make it what's called watertight. Okay, so it also translates it into inches if it was in millimeters, because the cube printer prefers the dimensions to be in inches. Alright, so now it's fixed any problems with the polygons in the object, and it's almost ready to print. So if, for example, I wanted to change the scale or the orientation, I could click this first one. And you can see it has an X and a Y and a Z axis for rotate. It has a percentage-based slider for scale, and it has an X and a Y slider for translate. So if you wanted to rotate it, you could dial this in. You can also type in a number here. And whenever you're done, you can just hit apply, and that will change the orientation of the model. So I wouldn't want to print like this. I'd probably want to print it flat, because right here you have what's called a floating texture. I don't want anything where there's nothing where if the printer was printing, I don't want any location that would let the printer filament just fall. So I'm going to put it flat instead, and there won't be any floating filament. So if the filament's coming down and there's nothing here for it to fall upon, that's what it's called floating. So I'm going to switch this back down to 0 and just type it in to be exact and hit apply. I will go ahead and change the scale though. You can make it larger and you can make it smaller. This blue square is actually the size of the cube printer plate. That looks a little small, and that looks just about right. Okay, so I'm going to hit apply, and you can see it's gotten a little bit off center. It's a little bit to the left. So when I'm done with this, I'm going to go on to the very next one, which is center, and that'll bring it right back to the very center of the pad. Okay, so before we build, I'm going to go into the build settings and explain that a little bit. So just starting at the top, you can see the units are set in inches. That's good. You want to leave that there. The raft is turned on. So a raft is a printed grid that's printed before the object for the object to sit on.
For the cube printers, I highly recommend using a raft. Printing directly onto the plate, unless you have some kind of sticky pad that goes on your printer pad, it doesn't work very well. So you definitely want to print directly onto a raft instead. So I'm going to go ahead and print on a raft. And remember, as I was talking about the floating polygons right here, if this was standing on its edge, I could turn supports on, and that would build pillars up that would stop the print filament from just falling in on the hole. So let me show you real quick what I mean. So if I change it in Y, 90 degrees, and you can see if this was level and it was printing, this filament would just fall down. It's still a little, it's not very strong when it's still really hot, so it would just fall down. So by adding supports, it's adding pillars in this space, and it won't let this filament fall down as it's printing. So I don't really need the supports on this case, but often you will need them. I would highly recommend trying to build models without using them, because they often are quite a pain to remove, but in this case, luckily, I don't need to use any, so I'm going to flip supports off. Okay, so the next three are a little bit important. The print mode I almost always set to hollow. If you want it a little bit stronger, you could put strong, and if you wanted it just non-stop solid piece of plastic, you would set it to solid. So let's just leave it at hollow, and I'm going to change my print material from PLA to ABS to PLA and ABS, and that'll guarantee that no matter what printer I'm using, I'll have the right type of file format. PLA and ABS are two different types of filament format. It's just made out of two different things, and they're very common with both types. So let's just set it to both so you guarantee to have it. And my cube model is the 2nd gen, so I'm going to leave that and hit done. So now it's ready to be built. Close this out. And all you have to do is hit build, and it's going to convert it from an STL into a cube type file. So let's do OK, and for ABS let's hit OK, and there we go. It says it's going to take about 38 minutes to do a PLA type file and about 45 to do an ABS. So now it's time to load these two files up and go ahead and print them.